The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light over the quiet, winding road. The trees on either side of the highway swayed gently in the breeze, creating a peaceful, almost idyllic scene. But suddenly, everything changed. The sound of screeching tires shattered the calm. A car, moving too fast, swerved violently across the road. Its tires lost grip, and in a blur of metal and glass, it crashed into a towering tree. The impact sent the car tumbling, spinning, and finally coming to a halt, smoke billowing from the wreckage. The once silent road now echoed with the sharp scent of burning rubber and the metallic taste of danger in the air. For a moment, there was nothing but stillness, a haunting quiet hanging in the air, and then the soft sound of whimpering. Inside the crumpled car, there was a child, a baby. Somehow, against all odds, it had survived the brutal crash. The baby lay motionless in the back seat, its tiny form barely visible amid the twisted metal and shattered glass. The only sign of life was the soft rise and fall of its chest. The wreckage was a chaotic mess, but this small, vulnerable life had made it through, at least for now. From the edge of the forest, a presence watched. Something massive, something not quite human. A gorilla, its dark eyes gleaming with a curious intensity, had been drawn to the noise. The crash had broken the calm of the woods, and now the great creature moved quietly, cautiously, toward the wreck. Every step it took was deliberate, each one heavier than the last. The gorilla's powerful muscles rippled as it stepped closer to the wreckage. Its instincts guided it. There was something in the air, something that called to it. The creature's nostrils flared as it sniffed the air, slowly approaching the car. As it got closer, the gorilla peered into the vehicle. Its eyes locked onto the baby, a small, helpless thing amidst the wreckage. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The creature, towering and strong, crouched down beside the broken car, its dark fur brushing against the ground. A deep, rumbling sound escaped the gorilla's throat, half growl, half concern. There was no sign of another living soul nearby, only the wreckage, the baby, and the growing sense that this was not just an accident. The gorilla's massive hand extended slowly, gingerly. It reached inside the wreck, careful not to disturb the baby. The creature's face softened, an expression of something almost like tenderness, before it carefully scooped the child up in its arms. For a moment, there was no sound but the rustling of the leaves in the trees, as if the entire forest held its breath. The gorilla didn't hesitate. It cradled the baby in its arms, a strange yet undeniable connection forming between them. Without a sound, it turned away from the wreckage and began to move, its powerful legs pushing it forward, away from the chaos, into the depths of the forest. The baby was alive. And now, the forest held its future. The gorilla's large, steady hands cradled the baby as it moved deeper into the forest. Each step was purposeful, its enormous muscles rippling beneath its dark fur. There was no panic in the creature's movements, just an innate sense of calm as it carefully navigated through the dense underbrush. The soft, comforting rhythm of its stride seemed to soothe the baby, who had fallen into an uneasy, exhausted sleep. The forest around them felt alive, its towering trees standing tall and silent, as though watching over the pair. The gorilla moved through this unfamiliar terrain with ease, as though it knew these woods like the back of its hand. The wind whispered through the leaves, and the sounds of distant animals seemed to fade into the background as the gorilla's focus remained solely on the child in its arms. Eventually, the gorilla came to a small clearing where the light from the setting sun streamed through the gaps in the trees, casting everything in a soft, ethereal glow. It looked around, assessing the area, before gently laying the baby down on a bed of thick, soft moss that grew near the base of a great tree. The baby stirred, but did not wake, still caught in the calm from the journey. With an almost deliberate precision, the gorilla began to gather branches and leaves, weaving them together to create a makeshift shelter around the baby. It worked silently, its movements slow and careful, as if it understood the fragile nature of the life it had just rescued. There was no rush, no frantic energy. The gorilla's actions were methodical, as though it was performing a task it had done countless times before, protecting something that needed to be kept safe. Once the shelter was built, the gorilla stood back, observing the scene. The baby was now nestled in the makeshift nest, tucked safely under a pile of leaves and branches. The gorilla's gaze softened, watching the tiny form rise and fall with each gentle breath. It seemed satisfied for the moment, but its protective instincts did not waver. It circled the baby one more time, checking the surroundings, making sure there was no danger. For a moment, everything was still, peaceful. The sounds of the forest returned, birds calling from the treetops and small animals rustling in the underbrush. But in the midst of it all, the gorilla stood vigilant, eyes fixed on the baby, its presence looming large and powerful, yet strangely gentle. The forest, it seemed, had accepted them both. The sun had fully set, leaving the forest in a cool, dim twilight. The once warm glow of the daylight was replaced by a quiet, ethereal darkness that wrapped itself around the trees. The baby, still lying in its nest of leaves and branches, stirred faintly in its sleep, its tiny hands twitching as if sensing the change in the air. The gorilla, however, had not moved far. It remained close by, just beyond the edge of the clearing, standing like a silent sentinel. The rustling of leaves was the only sound, but the creature's sharp senses detected every movement around them. The forest seemed alive, yet it had taken on an almost ominous quality, as if it, too, was watching. As the night deepened, the atmosphere grew heavier, but there was no fear in the gorilla. It had been in these woods before, understood their language in ways that humans could never know. Yet tonight, there was something different. Something unknown. Suddenly, a faint, high-pitched cry echoed through the trees. A distant sound, a warning perhaps, from some animal. The gorilla's ears twitched, and its stance stiffened. It glanced down at the baby, who still lay unaware, completely at peace despite the noise. But the gorilla, ever alert, knew that the forest could be unpredictable, especially in the dark. The gorilla moved closer to the baby, crouching low, its powerful arms brushing against the ground as it hovered protectively over the child. The clearing around them seemed to shrink, the shadows growing longer, darker. The gorilla kept its gaze fixed on the surrounding trees, listening, watching. From the depths of the forest came a series of low growls, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder. The gorilla's muscles tensed, and its sharp eyes narrowed. The growls were coming from a pack of wolves, not far off, but the gorilla stood its ground. Its posture was unwavering, a silent warning to any creature foolish enough to challenge its charge. Then, just as suddenly as the growls had started, the wolves fell silent. The tension hung in the air for a long moment before the sounds of the forest returned. Crickets, rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. The gorilla relaxed only slightly, still keeping one eye on the shadows around them. It was then that the baby began to stir again, a soft whimper escaping its lips. The gorilla, despite its alertness, immediately shifted its attention back to the child, its large hand gently brushing the baby's forehead. With a low, soft murmur, the gorilla let out a series of soothing sounds, almost like a lullaby. The baby quieted, its eyes fluttering open for a brief moment before closing again, comforted by the gorilla's presence. The forest seemed to breathe with them, the wind swirling through the trees, the night alive with whispers, and the subtle symphony of creatures hidden in the dark. The gorilla sat back on its haunches, eyes never leaving the baby, its instincts still alert. It seemed to be waiting for something, but in that moment, it was as though time itself stood still. The baby, now fully asleep, was safe, nestled within the protective embrace of the forest and the gorilla. Yet the eerie stillness remained, as if the very heart of the wilderness was holding its breath, waiting to see what would come next. As the moon climbed higher into the sky, casting an eerie silver light over the forest, the baby slowly began to wake. Its tiny fingers curled in the cool night air, and a soft, fragile cry broke the stillness of the forest. The sound was small, yet it cut through the night with a quiet urgency, and the gorilla's head snapped to attention. The creature, so large and imposing, softened its gaze as it moved toward the baby. Its steps were slow, almost reverent, as if it understood the delicate balance of the moment. The gorilla crouched down beside the baby, the shadows of the trees stretching long across the ground. With a deep breath, the gorilla extended its arm, gently lifting the child's head and offering the comforting warmth of its massive hand. The baby's cries faded as the gorilla let out a soft, low hum, a sound like a lullaby in the dark. The gorilla's voice, deep and soothing, echoed in the quiet, filling the space with an almost hypnotic rhythm. The baby's wide, innocent eyes locked onto the creature's face, and for a moment, everything seemed to pause. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the two stared at each other. For a few seconds, the baby's cries were replaced with calm, almost peaceful cooing. It was as if the gorilla had cast some sort of spell. Its presence alone had calmed the child, wrapping it in a sense of safety. The gorilla's large, calloused hand gently brushed over the baby's tiny body, ensuring it was comfortable and secure. Then, the baby shifted slightly, resting in the gorilla's arms. The creature, ever protective, adjusted its hold and began to rock the baby ever so slightly, moving back and forth in a rhythmic motion. The sound of leaves rustling in the breeze seemed to blend with the soft rocking, as if nature itself was joining in the lullaby. The baby's eyes fluttered closed again, lulled by the gorilla's presence and the natural music surrounding them. The gorilla stayed by the baby's side, unwavering. Its posture was proud, but still gentle, alert and watchful, yet nurturing. In this moment, it was a protector, a caretaker. The jungle around them hummed with the sounds of night creatures, but the bond between the gorilla and the baby felt unbreakable. The forest, which had seemed so vast and untamed just hours before, now felt like a sanctuary, an extension of the gorilla's own protective nature. As the baby slept soundly, the gorilla did not rest. It stayed alert, scanning the surroundings with keen eyes. A shift in the air, the rustling of bushes, any sign of danger, and the gorilla would act, no hesitation. But for now, everything was calm, and the baby's rhythmic breathing matched the heartbeat of the forest. In that peaceful stillness, the gorilla sat close, its gaze never leaving the child, its primal instincts at rest for only a moment. The moonlight shone through the trees, and the forest seemed to acknowledge this strange, profound connection. The baby was safe, and the gorilla's watchful care would not falter. The night passed quietly, the forest stretching endlessly under the glow of the moon, but the gorilla remained vigilant. Its sharp eyes never strayed from the baby. Every rustle of leaves, every shift in the wind, was met with a watchful gaze. The air seemed to carry a weight, as if something was lurking just beyond the edges of the clearing, but the gorilla's presence kept everything at bay. As dawn's first light broke through the trees, casting a soft glow over the forest floor, the baby stirred again. Its tiny fingers wiggled, reaching out instinctively, and a soft murmur escaped its lips. The gorilla leaned down, its large hand gently cupping the child's tiny body, providing a sense of comfort and security. With a low, rumbling sound, the gorilla exhaled in a way that almost seemed like a sigh of relief. The baby's eyes fluttered open, blurry at first, and then focused on the gorilla. There was a brief moment of uncertainty as the baby tried to make sense of its surroundings. The gorilla, calm and steady, lowered its face closer, allowing the child to see it more clearly. A strange connection seemed to form in that moment, as though the two had always belonged together in this vast, wild world. The baby's soft cry echoed through the clearing, but there was no fear in its voice. The gorilla responded in kind, humming softly again. the low vibrations of its voice filling the air. Slowly, the baby stopped crying, as though the gorilla's calm presence was enough to soothe its every need. The forest, now bathed in the golden light of the morning, seemed to come alive. Birds began to sing their early songs, and the breeze stirred the leaves. The gorilla carefully cradled the baby in its arms, and without hesitation, began to move again. It was clear that the creature had no intention of leaving the forest, and neither would the baby. The bond between them was undeniable. The gorilla moved slowly, walking with purpose, but always staying close to the baby. Its eyes scanned the forest around them, watching for any sign of danger, but its movements were gentle, almost tender as it navigated the terrain. Every now and then, it would stop, ensuring that the baby was safe and content in its arms. As the day unfolded, the gorilla found a small stream running through the forest. It paused there for a moment, its sharp eyes darting to the water's edge. With careful precision, the gorilla knelt down, dipping its large hand into the cool water and bringing it to the baby's mouth. The baby hesitated at first, but then instinctively opened its mouth, drinking the water in small sips. The gorilla continued to feed it gently, as though it had done this before, though no one could know how. With each small, peaceful moment, the gorilla's care for the baby seemed to deepen. The bond was undeniable. The baby was no longer just a fragile life to protect. It was a part of this world, a part of the forest that the gorilla had sworn to protect. By the time the sun reached its peak, the baby had fallen asleep once more, its tiny body nestled securely in the gorilla's arms. The creature moved forward again, its steps quiet but purposeful, continuing to weave through the dense forest. It wasn't just protecting the baby from danger. It was showing the child the very essence of life in the wild. The beauty of the trees, the flow of the streams, the whisper of the wind. It was a world the baby would come to know, not through words, but through the care and protection of a creature who had sworn to keep it safe. The forest whispered around them as the gorilla continued its journey, carrying the baby closer to its own destiny in this wild, untamed world. And with each step, the future of the two seemed to intertwine more deeply with the heart of the forest itself. As the days passed, the gorilla and the baby became a part of the forest's rhythm. The baby, now growing stronger, started to show signs of curiosity, reaching out to touch the leaves and flowers that the gorilla would bring close. Each time the baby's tiny hand brushed against a new texture, the gorilla would watch closely, its dark eyes filled with an unspoken understanding. It seemed to sense that the baby was learning, adapting to the wild world around it. The gorilla continued to care for the baby with unmatched devotion. It taught the child through its actions, showing how to find food, how to drink from streams, how to navigate the thick underbrush of the forest with ease. But more than that, the gorilla offered something deeper: protection, safety, and a bond that transcended words. The creature seemed to know that this was not just about survival. It was about showing the baby the delicate balance of life, the beauty of the natural world, and how to live in harmony with it. There were moments when the forest felt alive with possibility, when the sun filtered through the leaves in golden beams, or when the wind rustled the trees in a soft, constant whisper. The gorilla would stop in these moments, its gaze lingering on the horizon as though taking it all in, ensuring that the world it was showing the baby was one of peace and balance. It moved like a guardian of the wild, its every action a silent promise to protect the life it had rescued. One morning, as the sun broke through the misty forest, the baby woke, its wide eyes taking in the world around it. The gorilla, always close by, sat beside the child, its powerful frame seeming to blend seamlessly with the natural landscape. It reached out, offering a small fruit, showing the baby how to peel it. The baby's tiny fingers fumbled at first, but under the watchful eye of the gorilla, it learned quickly. The gorilla watched with a quiet sense of pride, a subtle glimmer in its eyes as the baby took its first bite. There was a connection, a shared understanding between them. The forest was not just a backdrop to their story. It was a character in its own right, a silent witness to the unbreakable bond between the gorilla and the child. As the baby grew, so too did its awareness of the world. The soft cooing that had once filled the air was now replaced with small sounds, expressions of curiosity as the baby pointed at birds, insects, and the occasional squirrel that passed by. The gorilla would stop whatever it was doing to allow the child to marvel at the wonders of the forest. It became clear that the gorilla wasn't just a protector, it was a teacher, guiding the baby through each lesson with patience and care. But despite the peaceful days, there was always a sense of underlying vigilance. The gorilla's senses were never dulled, its sharp eyes ever watchful. The forest was a beautiful and dangerous place, and though the baby was thriving under the gorilla's care, the creature knew there were threats lurking in the shadows. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the wind shifted, bringing with it the faint sound of distant growls. The gorilla stood, instantly alert. Its large frame tensed, and it began scanning the area, its gaze piercing the darkening woods. The growls grew louder, unmistakable now. Wolves. The gorilla's protective instincts kicked in as it moved swiftly toward the baby, scooping the child up into its arms and retreating into the dense thicket. The sound of the wolves grew fainter as the gorilla moved deeper into the woods, its powerful limbs carrying them both further away from danger. Despite the tension, the gorilla never faltered. Its presence was unshaken, its purpose clear. The baby, nestled securely against the gorilla's chest, was safe once more. The forest, once again, returned to its quiet hum, and the gorilla's vigilance resumed, never once allowing its guard to drop. It would continue to be the protector, the teacher, and the guardian of this precious life it had sworn to protect. As the days wore on, the forest felt more like home for the baby. Each new discovery, each new lesson, seemed to bring the two closer, forming a bond that was not just built on survival, but on something far deeper: trust, connection, and an unspoken promise that no matter what came, the gorilla would always be there. The months continued to pass, and the baby, now no longer so fragile, had grown into a small child, learning from the gorilla's every move. It followed the creature through the forest, mimicking the gentle steps, observing how the gorilla used its powerful hands to gather food and build shelters. The forest had become the child's playground, a place full of wonders and dangers alike, but with the gorilla always nearby, the child felt safe. The child's laughter, a sound so pure and innocent, echoed through the trees. It was a rare sound in the vast wilderness, and it seemed to light up the forest in ways no one could describe. The gorilla, as always, was ever vigilant, but it also seemed to smile, if only in the smallest of ways. There was an undeniable joy in seeing the baby grow stronger, more independent, yet still completely reliant on the creature's protection and guidance. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, the gorilla stopped by the stream where it had once fed the baby. The child was now old enough to walk on its own, its little legs running alongside the gorilla, mimicking its every move. The two of them approached the water, the child's eyes widening as the gorilla dipped its hands into the stream, letting the water flow between its fingers. The child crouched down beside the gorilla, eagerly copying the gesture, splashing water onto its face, giggling with joy. The gorilla watched, its eyes soft, but always alert. It knew that in moments like this, the child was not just playing, it was learning. The world was no longer something to be feared, but something to be understood. And the gorilla was teaching the child how to embrace every part of it. The sound of the stream and the birds overhead filled the air, creating a serene harmony that seemed to wrap itself around them like a protective cloak. But as the day drew to a close, something in the air shifted. The breeze, once soft and calm, grew heavy with an unsettling chill. The gorilla's sharp instincts kicked in. It stood upright, its body tense, and its eyes scanned the perimeter of the clearing. The child, sensing the change in the atmosphere, instinctively reached for the gorilla's hand, its small fingers curling around the creature's massive fingers. The forest had been quiet for so long, and yet the gorilla knew better than to let its guard down. The sudden shift in the air was enough to signal that something was coming. With swift, practiced movements, the gorilla gently pulled the child back into the thick underbrush, away from the open space. The child clung to the gorilla, understanding without words that something was wrong. The growl that rumbled from the shadows was unmistakable. Another predator had entered their territory. The gorilla's muscles rippled as it turned to face the direction of the growl. Its eyes narrowed, and it let out a low, warning rumble of its own, a deep, resonant sound that filled the air. The growl in response was louder now, closer, as a large, predatory figure emerged from the trees, a massive wildcat, its eyes gleaming with hunger. The tension in the air was palpable as the two creatures faced off. The gorilla didn't hesitate. It placed itself between the wildcat and the child, its powerful frame acting as a barrier. The gorilla's growl was deep and forceful, a clear warning to the wildcat that it would not pass without a fight. The wildcat, undeterred, took a step forward, its claws flexing as it sized up its opponent. In that moment, the gorilla knew the child was no longer the helpless infant it had once found in the wreckage. The child was a part of the wild now, a part of this untamed world, and it was the gorilla's duty to protect that. The tension in the air grew thicker, but the gorilla stood firm, its eyes locked onto the wildcat, waiting for the right moment to strike if necessary. The growl from the wildcat was interrupted by a sudden, sharp crack of a branch beneath the gorilla's feet. The wildcat, startled for just a split second, hesitated. That brief hesitation was all the gorilla needed. With a roar, the gorilla lunged forward, its massive hands swiping through the air with incredible speed and strength. The wildcat barely had time to react before it was sent skidding backward, its eyes wide with shock. The wildcat, now realizing it had underestimated its opponent, let out a frustrated hiss before disappearing into the dense underbrush, retreating into the shadows from which it had come. The forest fell silent once more. The threat passed, but the gorilla remained vigilant. Its muscles still coiled with energy, and its eyes scanned the area, not yet satisfied that the danger was truly gone. The gorilla's hand gently rested on the child's head, comforting and reassuring. The child, though frightened, seemed to understand that they were safe. The gorilla's presence had kept the wildcat at bay, and in that moment, the child learned the lesson of the wilderness. Not all creatures were kind, but there was strength in knowing how to face danger and survive. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, the gorilla continued its watch. The child, now growing even more attached to the creature that had saved and cared for it, sat quietly by its side. The bond between them was stronger than ever. The forest was wild, unpredictable, and at times dangerous, but together they would face whatever came. The child had a protector, a teacher, and a friend in the gorilla, and in this untamed world, that was all they needed.